So today the topic will be Dinei Kedima b'mitzvahs, Todia v'she'enoi todir todi koidem, because the source of this sugya is in Karbonos. It is a Mishnah in Zevachim Daf Pei Tes Amud Aleph. Todia v'she'enoi todia, todia koidem, and Daf Tzadik Amud Beis, there's a bay in the Gemara, because the Mishnah gives us two principles. Todi comes before she'enoi todia. A mitzvah that is more common comes before a mitzvah that is less common. Mekudesh comes before Einoi Mekudesh, a mitzvah that is more holy. How could say all the mitzvahs are holy? Who are we to judge what is holier than another mitzvah? But there is a halacha concept of Mekudesh, which we will try to define in today's shiur. Mekudesh comes before Einoi Mekudesh, Todi comes before Einoi Todia. And then there's a bayah de lo ifsheta daf tzadik u'med beis, todir against mekudesh. So the two principles are mekudesh v'she'enoi mekudesh, mekudesh koidem. Todir v'she'enoi todir, todir koidem. What happens when todir clashes with mekudesh? What has precedence? So just to give a few examples, todir v'she'enoi todir. Every day in the Beis HaMikdash there was Shnei Tamidim. It's in this week's parasha, the Shnei Tamidim. Shabbos, Yom Tov, there is Korban Musaf. So the Tumid comes before the Musaf because the Tumid is every day. And the Musaf is it's not as common as the Tamid Shel Shachar and Tamid Shel Beinu Abayim. Chatos and Oila, which comes first. Chatos comes first when we're talking about the Dam Chatos. Both Dam Chatos and both Dam Oila are Hazor Gabe Mizbeach. But the Chatos is Mechaper, and the oil is not Mechaper. So Dam Chatos is Mekudesh Medam Oila. When it comes to Haktores or Eimerim, oil is more Mekudesh than Chatos. Because oil is Kulei Korban, the entire Korban goes on the Mizbeach, and only a little portion of the Chatos. So these are the two concepts, Todia and Mekudesh. And the source of both of these concepts are Kodshim. Karbonos, this week's parasha. So the Gemara has a suffix, Todia v'Mekudesh, which comes first, and it is a boya de lo ifshata. And that is why the Rambam paskins, T'midin v'mesofen perik tes alocha beis, eze mehem sheyirtze yagdim. There is no priority. And whatever the Kohen wants. Eze Shiur Tziyakdim, when we're dealing with Todia, Keneged Mekudash. Eze Shiur Tziyakdim. Interesting, Rabbeinu Avadia on the Mishnah in Masechet Zvachim says Todia comes before Mekudash. Even though in the Gemara, that is not the conclusion. It is a Baye de lo ifshata. Turezov, Tov Reish Peyalav Sivkot Nalav, also Paskins Todi comes before Mekudesh. And the Shagasai in Semechov Ches wonders, where did they get this? Because in the Gemara, in Zevachim, it is a Bayed de lo ifshata. Shtei Tshuvis Bedavar, Menoches Mem Tes Amud Beis. If we only have money to buy one animal, one korban, what comes first, Todia or Musaf, Tomid or Musaf? So unlike the Sugya Masechet Zvachim, in which we're dealing in a situation we have enough karbonis. The question is just what comes first and what comes second. The Sugya Menocha says it is the days of the Chorban. We can only achieve one animal to be a makav korban. Do we take the Tomid or the Musaf? And the Gemara Menoches Memtes says, Todia v'Mekudesh, Todia koidem. So what in Zvochem Daf Tzadik is a boy de lo yifshata, in Menoches Memtes, there does seem to be a conclusion. However, many poskim on the spot say that is not the correct gersa in the Gemara. The Gemara means to say that the Tomid and the Musaf of Shabbos or Yom Tov, the Tomid is both Todia and Mekudash. Tomid, a weekday Tomid, and a Shabbos de Musaf, that is the question of Todia against Mekudash. The Tomid of the weekday, the Friday's Tomid, is Todia. The Shabbos de Musaf is Mekudesh, because it's a Shabbos Dika Korban. But if we go only by one animal, then that is the Shabbos Dika Tumid or the Shabbos Dika Musaf. Both are Shabbos Dika Korbanos. And that is why the Gemara says we prefer to buy the Tumid, because it is both Todia and the Mekudash. So according to that gersa in the Gemara, it still is a Bayed Lo Yifshita. So we would still wonder, why did Rabbeinu Avadia Paskin that Toder overrides Mekudash? It is a Yerushalmi, and obviously this psak is based on the Yerushalmi and Brochas, Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis. So the Gemara deals with the question that we find in Bavli, the same discussion. Yayin, Berches Yayin comes before the Brocha of Kedushas Hayoim, and why is that? The Brocha of Kedushas Hayoim, Mekadesh HaShabbos, is more Mekudesh than Boda Pri Hagofen. This is a Shabbos Dika Brocha, and Berches Yayin is not a Shabbos Dika Brocha, and Yayin comes before Kiddush Yom because Todir comes before Mekudesh. We find the same discussion in Bavli, but in Bavli we find difference of others. Yayin goyim lekiddush shitei omer. Kiddush Hayoim necessitates yayin. Kiddush Hayoim is adayin yayin loy bo. Kiddush Hayoim is chal b'tzeisek echovim, and a person just makes kiddush when he comes home from shul. So in Bavli we find different svaras regarding the machlekes. What comes first and what comes second? Kiddush Hayoim comes before yayin, or yayin before Kiddush Hayoim? Beis Hillel says yayin comes first. So the Yerushalmi says Todia comes before Mekudash. So obviously, even though in the Bavli there is no conclusion, but the Yerushalmi and Brochas Nun Vav Amud Beis clearly seems to say that Todia comes before Mekudash. How do we define Mekudash? Todia is relatively easy to define. Berches Hayayin, people say every day, Boda Pri Hagofen. Kiddush Hayoim is only Shabbos in Yom Tov. Every day we have the Tomash Shachar, Tomash Rabbeinu Abayim. The Musaf is only Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's relatively easy to decide and define what is Todia. How do we define Mekudesh? And this is a little bit baffling, because the examples we find in the Gemara, a Shabbos Dika Korban is considered Mekudesh against a weekday korban. Why would that be? A korban is a korban. So obviously Shabbos has more kedusha than a weekday. How would that affect the korbanos? And in halacha, the same halachas that apply to a Shabbos korban apply to a weekday korban. Same avodas, same psul machshava, same din of pigel v'noisa, same isra noah, same mitzvahs achilas abosa. There is no real different halacha, but nevertheless, the Gemara says a Shabbos korban is considered more mekudesh than a Yom Tov than a weekday korban. The brocha of Kedushas Hayoim is more mekudesh than Boda Pri Hagofen. Why would that be? They're both the brochas. Is any brocha heiliger, has more holiness or more kedush than an other brocha? I think besides Berches Hamazon, which is the only brocha that is Mena Torah, Asher Yotzar has the same kiddush as Asher Bocha Bono Mekol Ramim. We do find Asher Bocha Bono are more of the Ha'oretz, but fundamentally a Shabbos Dika brocha Kiddush Hayoim has more kedusha than Boda Pri Hagofen. Why would that be? So the concept of kedusha does not necessitate more kedusha based on halacha, but any higher level of kedusha, even in an abstract way, that does not really affect halacha, is defined as mekudesh. So on one hand, dam chatos against dam oila, dam chatos is mekudesh. Why? Both have the same mitzvah b'zorga b'mizbeach, but dam chatos is mechaper, and dam oila is not mechaper. So what? So that is more mekudesh. Besar oila is considered more mekudesh than besar chatos. Why? Because the oila kuloi korel, the entire animal, all the flesh goes on the mizbeach. and only a small part of the chatos. So what? But that part of the chatos, why wouldn't that be considered as mekudesh as the oila? No, because oila kulei kolom. So what I'm just trying to explain and trying to prove, the concept of mekudesh is ill-defined, and even nuances determine which of the two mitzvahs is more mekudesh, even though we cannot define in halachic criteria why this is more mekudesh than another. Diurais and the Rabbanon. Would it go without saying that a mitzvah diurais is considered yoyse mekudesh mea mitzvah derabbanon? L'chaira, I would say, of course, a mitzvah diurais is far more chomer than a mitzvah derabbanon. Surprisingly, this is an argument of machlokes and achronim, whether a mitzvah diurais would have precedence and come before a mitzvah derabbanon based on the concept of mekudesh. The Noida B'Yehuda in both of his magnificent svarim, Tzlach, twice in Masechet Brochas, Daf Daled Amid Beis and Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis, the Tzlach writes, of course, the Uraisa against the Rabbanon, the Uraisa would always come first because it is Mekudesh Yoisa Mitzvah Rabbanon. We find this again in Noida B'Yehuda Madura Kamar Chaim Simen Nun Tes. Rabbi Kiva Eiger, Chuvas Rabbi Kiva Eiger Simen Zayin, is mesupek if a person has two brochas before benching, and he finished the Suda, and he needs to go to the bathroom. Birchas Hamazon or Asher Yotzar, which comes first? Hard to define which is more todia, because, well, it depends. People eat twice or three times a day. Usually they go to the bathroom more than that. So Rabbi Kiva Eiger deals with the question. And Rabbi Kiva Eiger says, Lecha oira. Birchas Hamazon is the only brocha in which everybody agrees it's min haTorah. The first posuk, v'yochaltu v'savotu v'rachtu says Shem Elokecho. Asher Yotzar definitely is a mitzvah derabbanon, and Rabbi Kiva Eiger seems to be mesupek whether Birchas Hamazon would have precedence at Asher Yotzar because it's more mekudesh. And to me, it is a bit a gevaldige chiddush. I definitely would accept the Noida B'Yehuda's approach that a diuraisa l'gabe derabbanon definitely would be defined as mekudesh. Amudei Or, very choshev Sefer Rabbi Chiel Heller and Simen Lamed Vav, also deals with a similar question. Diuraisa l'gabe derabbanon. Shagasaria, in the above mentioned siman that I mentioned before, the Shagasaria, I think it's Simachov Beis and not in Simachov Ches. Shagasaria argues, a diuraisa wouldn't come before derabbanon. Why not? So the Shagasaria takes this argument to another extreme, and he says, "A derabbanon lagabei diuraisa is considered as if a reshus, as if it's not a mitzvah at all, and the rules of precedence, Kedima, b'mitzvahs is only between one mitzvah and another, but a person is entitled to do a ma'aseh shel reshus before a mitzvah. The entire endeavor, the entire sugya of Kedima b'mitzvahs is only when a person has two mitzvahs to perform. Which comes first, which comes second. But if he has some private things to take care of, he's entitled to take care of them before davening. Not in the morning. Before Shachris Oseles Asek B'tzorachov. But before any other mitzvah, before Svias Weimer, before Natilas Lulav, before davening Mincha, there are rules. You can't start a Suda. You can't get into an activity that is very engaging. But you definitely could do some minor personal acts before doing a mitzvah. And that would not be considered an Aveda. So a mitzvah does not necessarily need to be performed before a ma'aseh shel reshus, an act that is not a mitzvah at all. So if I just want to make a list of the things I need to do tonight, is it an Aveda to do that before davening mincha? Or before Svias Uoima? It's not any major activity. It's not going to the barber. It's not going to a beis merchetz. It's not going to eat a big su'uda. Those are the things we have a Mishnah and Shabbos Daftes you can't do before davening. But some minor activity, there is no din of precedence that a mitzvah comes before a reshus. So the Shagasari argues, that Rabbona Lagabe Diorais is like a reshus, and therefore the Oraisa wouldn't have precedence. It wouldn't be a din of Mekudesh or Yisad Rabbanon, because it is so much more Mekudesh than a Rabbanon that the Rabbanon Bachal will be considered as a reshus and not as a mitzvah at all. So these are the two extremes. The Noide B'Yude Pshitale, that the Oraisa comes before the Rabbanon because it's Mekudesh. Rabbi Kiva Eger is somewhat Mesupik, and the Shagasarya says Pshitali, that the Oraisa does not necessarily come before the Rabbanon, because the Rabbanon Lagabe the Oraisa would be considered as a reshus. And I think this is also a far-fetched argument, and therefore, Ibedi d'Italia, my feeling would be that the Noide B'Yude is right. At the Oraisa Lagabe the Rabbanon definitely would be defined as Mekudesh, and therefore the Oraisa should always come before the Rabbanon. And Birchas Hamazon should come before Ashiyotza. There might be another reason to say Ashiyotza comes before Birchas Hamazon. Because Ashiyotza, the din is lechatchila, one should make no hefsek and say Ashiyotza immediately. When he comes out of the bathroom, he washes his hands. Lechatchila, you should say it immediately. You could still say it after time, as long as you don't need to go to the bathroom again. But that is a shtickle b'di'evad. Birchas Hamazon, there is no din of hefsek, there is no din of immediacy. Kol od lo avar shiur ikul, it's still a lechatchila dekazman. So that might be another reason why Ashiyotza should come before Birchas Hamazon. But Mitzad Mekudash, the Noide B'Yude seems to be right, that the Oraisa would be fine, Yoisa Mekudash ven Ederabbanon. So the Ramo Paskins and Simareish pay Aleph in Yoredeya. If a person has enough funds, enough money to buy tefillin or mezuzah, what has precedence? What is more important, tefillin or mezuzah? And the Ramo writes, tefillin comes first because it is choyves haguf. What does it mean, choyves haguf? Both mitzvahs are of the same fundamental essence. In the tefillin and in the mezuzah, we have the same parshiyos, Kriyas Shema, Kabbalas or Malchus Shemayim. So they have something in common, but still there are two different mitzvahs. Tefillin and mezuzah, if you could only buy one, what comes first? So the concepts of Todim v'Mekudash we find in two different scenarios. When a person intends to be Mekayim both mitzvahs, and the question is, which comes first and which will wait and come in second. And that is the fundamental sugya in the Mishnah in Zvochem Peites. The sugya Menachos deals with a different scenario. We can only be Mekayim one mitzvah, and we need to choose which of the two. And once again, even in that case, we say Todia comes before Einoi Todia. Mekudesh comes before Einoi Mekudesh. So the Ramon Yoredeya Simareish Pei Aleph says, if you could either buy tefillin or mezuzah, the tefillin comes first because it's choyves haguf. And there's a machlokes in Achronim. What does choyves haguf mean? The Beis Hillel, one of the important svarim on Shulchan Aruch, primarily Yoredeya, the Beis Hillel says choyves haguf means tefillin you wear on your body, on your forehead, on your arm. That's on your body, and that is choyves haguf, has more importance than choyves habayis. That's the Beis Hillel. And Rabbi Kiva Eiger, Shuvas Rabbi Kiva Eiger Sementes, and Rabbi Kiva Eiger on the Shulchan Aruch as well, disagrees. And his pshat is choyves haguf means it's a mitzvah chiyuvis. Tefillin is a mitzvah chiyuvis. Each and every Jew needs to put on tefillin each and every day. Mezuzah, you're not chayiv only if you have a house. If you don't live in a home, you don't have a home. If you're homeless, you don't have a chayiv of mezuzah. Min haTorah, if you rent a house, you don't have a chayiv of mezuzah. It's just a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And the chiyuv mezuzah min haTorah is only if you own the house. So in a way, mezuzah would be defined in the yeshiva shesprach as a mitzvah kiyumis, similar to tzitzis. If you don't wear dalet kamfis, you're not required to wear tzitzis. If I don't live in a house, in my own house, I don't have a chiyuv mezuzah. Tefillin is different. You need to achieve tefillin, you need to acquire tefillin, and you need to put on tefillin. And that is what the Ramo means, chayvas haguf. So maybe translating the words chayvas haguf, the Beis Hillel would be more appealing, but the Bekiva Eiger has a gewaldige raya, and it's a raya she'ein olei tshuva. The source of this sugya is not in Bavli, but it's rather Yerushalmi. The very last shtickle Yerushalmi in Masechet Megillah. In Megillah Daf Lamed Daled Omud Aleph in Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi has an Abaya, and the Yerushalmi brings a Machlokes Amaron, Tefillin or Mezuzah, which comes first. And the question is not which comes first, which comes second, because Mezuzah is kavua on your doorpost. The question is, if we just have enough money for one of the two, which comes first? And there's a Machlokes. One says, Mezuzah comes first, because mezuzah is a chiyuv each and every day of the year, day and night. Tefillin excludes Shabbos and Yom Tov. Does this sound familiar? That's Todia. That's the argument of Todia. So mezuzah is Todia mer from Tefillin. The other man, the Omer, says Tefillin comes first, because Tefillin is a chiyuv an holche midboriyos and parsayamim. And that is exactly the Bekiva Eiger's pshat. If you're traveling in the desert, I don't live in a home. I don't have a permanent home. I don't have a mitzvah of mezuzah. If I'm in the high sea for 3 months, I don't have a chiyuv mezuzah. And that's the Bekiva Eiger's pshat in the Ramo, chayvus haguf. It is totally unreasonable that the Ramo comes up with a new halacha or a new svara, which goes against the Chazal. The source of this halacha is the Yerushalmi. At the end of Megillah, the Yerushalmi gives another reason. The Yerushalmi says, the Manda Omer that says Tefillin comes first, why is that? Because even Holchamid Boreas are chayiv in Tefillin. Holchamid Boreas and the people that are at sea are not chayiv in Mezuzah, but they are chayiv in Tefillin. And that's the Bekiva Eiger's pshat in chayvus haguf. But then the question would be, so why is that more important than Todia? Or even Todia and Mekudesh? So I think what we need to take out of this Ramah and this Yerushalmi is the concepts of Kedima b'mitzvahs, Todia against Mekudesh, are only when both mitzvahs are the same darg as chiyuv, but when one mitzvah is a bigger mitzvah than the other, then it is a poshet svara, hachomor doche et hakal. So there are two mitzvahs to say that are chorus. So mitzvahs mila against mitzvahs tefillin. What would come first? Definitely mila, because it's asay sheyesh bo chorus. So all the sugyas of Todah v'Mekudesh is when mitzvah etzem b'mitzvah, one mitzvah is not more chomer than the other. The Tomer is a korban and the Musaf is a korban. Birchas hayayin is a brocha and Kiddush Yom is a brocha. However, Kiddush Yom is min haTorah. But we won't go into this discussion. Maybe the mitzvah min haTorah person is already Mekayim in Tefillah when he said Mekadosh Shabbos. According to the Magen Avraham, that's what the Magen Avraham says in Siman Reish Ayin Aleph. And then afkamina between the Beis Hillel and Bekiva Eiger, pshat in the Ramah, chayvus haguf, would be by lulav. So tefillin and lulav, which one has precedence? If pshat in chayvus haguf is, it is a mitzvah that you wear on your body, then tefillin would become before lulav. If pshat in chayvus haguf means it's a mitzvah chiyuvis, contrary to mezuzah, which depends whether you have a home or not, lulav is a mitzvah chiyuvis just like tefillin. So tefillin wouldn't have precedence over lulav. And that would be the nafkamina between the two. Simachofei Sif Aleph. The Shulchan Aruch says, in the morning you put on your talis, and only then do you put on tefillin. And that is what we all know, and that is what we all do every day in the morning. You put on talis, and then you put on tefillin. And why is that the talis comes before tefillin? The Beis Yosef brings two different reasons. Tzitzis regard against tefillin is both Todia and Mekudesh. Because tefillin isn't relevant, Shabbos and Yom Tov, and tzitzis is a chiyuv each and every day of the year. So tzitzis is more Todia than a tefillin, and tzitzis is also more Mekudesh than tefillin. Why would that be? What has more kedusha, tefillin or tzitzis? We all know, of course, tefillin. You can't go into the bathroom with your tefillin, but you could go into the bathroom with your tzitzis. By halachic definition, tefillin are tashmisha kedusha. Tzitzis are only tashmisha mitzvah. When you no longer use your tefillin, they need geniza. Me'ikar adin, tzitzis doesn't need geniza. There's just an issa to do a tashmish bizayin with tzitzis, but it doesn't need geniza. You could throw out your worn tzitzis when you no longer wear them. Me'ikar adin. So why does the Beis Yosef say that tzitzis is more mekudash? The answer is a very simple one. When we're dealing with kedushas hacheftzah, of course tefillin has more kedusha than tzitzis, because tefillin is tashmisha kedusha, tzitzis are only tashmisha mitzvah. But the dinim of Kedima b'tzedoka are not about kedushas hacheftzah, but kedushas hamitzvah. As a mitzvah, tzitzis is a greater mitzvah than tefillin, because on tzitzis Chazal say, shkula mitzvah tzitzis keneged kol ha-mitzvah shebetoira. And that is because the Pasuk says, Ureisam oisa yuzachartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem v'asisam oisam. There's only a handful of mitzvahs about which Chazal say, shkula mitzvah zu keneged kol ha-mitzvah shebetoira, and tzitzis is one of them. And therefore tzitzis, compared to tefillin, is both Todea and the Mekudash. Comes along the Ramah, and the Ramah says, this halacha that first you put on your talis and only then tefillin is only if talis and tefillin munochem lefonecha. B'shosha matzav amora menochem lefonecha. B'shosha talis of tefillin menochem lefonecha. But if you don't have a talis and you do have tefillin, first you put on tefillin, and whenever you get the talis, you're going to put on your talis. So this Ramah seems to make it clear that the dinei kedima of Todeh v'Mekudesh is when both mitzvahs are muchan v'mezuman lefanenu. And it is up to us to decide which we do first and which we do second. But if one mitzvah is muchan b'fanenu, and for the other one we're still waiting, then why wait? Why not put on tefillin immediately and b'mekayim mitzvahs tefillin? So that is clear in the Ramah. So, the Magen Avraham says, Tov Reish Mem Daled Sif Koten Aleph, that the minhag is to say Birchas Halulav before Hallel. After Shachris, before Hallel, you take your lulav and you make the bracha. And that is a very common minhag. In every shul, you see people, Chalamoid Sukkos, rushing out to the sukkah or the first day sukkahs, with a daled minim to make the bracha before Hallel, after Tfilas Shachas. And that's in the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Tov Reish Mem Daled. Rabbi Yankov Ettlinger, the Orach Laner, in his beautiful sefer Bekuri Yankov and Hilchas Lulav and Sukkah, the Bekuri Yankov and Tov Reish Mem Daled says, why would we wait with mitzvahs lulav till after Shachas? Why wouldn't we say Zlizn Magadim and Le mitzvahs? So many people today have a different minhag, and they say the bracha and the lulav in their private home and the sukkah before they go to shul. And that is my minhag. That is what I do. So the Shulchan Aruch says, you say bracha and your lulav after shachris before musaf. And why is that? Because Todeh v'sheina Todeh. So Tfilah Shachris is more Todeh than Lulav. Lulav is only 7 days a year. for the Shachris is each and every day. So Todi v'she'ena Todi koidem. Because we do Nanuim, we need to say Berch Lulav before Halal, because of the Nanuim and Halal. But Shachris comes before Lulav because Todi v'she'ena Todi koidem. But the question is, if you have a minyan kavua for Shachris, and you know you're not going to shul before 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, why wait with the Lulav? Wouldn't that be the same case as the Ramah? You have tefillin and you don't have your talis yet. So why push off a Lulav to a later hour because you want to daven Shachris before Mrs. Lulav? But if you're not davening Shachris 6 o'clock in the morning, what? So l'cha'ira, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger would be right, especially in a case in which you have a minyan kavua for Shachris, and that time is not here yet. Why wait and not be makayim mitzvahs lulav? Todi v'she'enoi todi koidem is only when both the todi and the she'enoi todi are muchan v'mezuman lefanav. But the Ramo says you don't wait for your talis. You don't wait with your tefillin until you're going to get a talis. So why wait with your lulav till you're going to daven Shachris at a later hour? And that is why my minig is, I say the Berch Lulav early in the morning before I go to shul. In days of yore, most shuls didn't have a sukkah. Every house had a sukkah. So there were more people that made the brocha at home because, according to the Mekabolim, one should bench on the lulav in the sukkah. Reb Chaim Vital, Pri Eitz Chaim, Shar Lulav, Bogan Avram Tov Reish Nun Beis brings the same principle from the Shlo. So the Mekabolim say there's an Indian to combine the two misses and bench on your lulav in the sukkah. And many shuls didn't have sukkahs. Today, almost every shul has a sukkah. So that would not be a reason to say Berchas Lulav at home, because you have a sukkah next to your shul as well. But the argument to say lulav at home would be, why wait? But the Ramo says, you don't wait for your tzitzis, you don't push off your tefillin until you're going to get your tzitzis. So why push off Berchas Lulav till you're going to daven Shachris at a later hour? So the Moshe Feinstein, Orach Chaim, Chelik Daled, Siman Tzadik Tes, disagrees with those people that bench on their lulav at home in the morning before going to shul, and the August Todi v'she'ena Todi koidem. But I wonder, it's a beferish Ramah, and the Ramah says Todi koidem is only if both mitzvahs are before you and you intend to be makayim them both right now, and that is when you need to give a din kedima to Tudor or to Mekudesh. But this is actually a machlokes in Rishonim that we find in Brochas Chaf Ches Amud Aleph. Chazal say, if you're late with Tfilas Musaf and it is already Zman Mincha, Mincha becomes before Musaf because Todi v'she'enoi Todi koidem. And because you daven Mincha each and every day of the year, and you only daven Musaf Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh, Mincha comes before Musaf. And Tosfos asks, but that's not our minig on Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur we daven long and we daven slow. And sometimes by the time we start Musaf, it is already this man of Mincha Gedolah. And why don't we adhere to the halacha? If it's already Zman Mincha, Todi v'she'enoi Todi koidem, and you should have a Mincha before davening Musaf. But Tosfos says, we don't do that. That's not our minig. And Yom Kippur we daven Musaf before Mincha, even though the Zman Mincha is already here by the time we want to start Musaf. So there are two mahalchim in Tosfos, Daf Chof Ches, Rabbeinu Yoina, Tosfos Arash. One mahalach is exactly what we proved from the Ramah, and what I just said about my personal minig about Berchas Lulav. So Mincha comes before Musaf only if, by coincidence, you are late for Musaf. But this is the time in which you usually daven mincha. So both mitzvahs are mukhan v'mezuman lefanov. Todi v'she'enoi todi koidem. Yom Kippur is different. Yom Kippur, we have no intention of davening mincha so early. We usually daven mincha late. And if your own minhag is to daven mincha late on Yom Kippur, then there is no din to be magde mincha mitzad todi v'she'enoi todiyam. So this would be exactly the same situation as the lulav sukkahs in the morning. I daven 7 o'clock. I daven 7:30. So why wait with the lulav till you're going to daven? Why wait with tefillin till somebody's going to bring you scissors? If you don't have scissors right now, put on tefillin. So why wait with musaf till you're going to daven mincha? Because you never planned to daven an early mincha, and therefore the din of Todi V'Shein and Todi Koidem would not apply. However, we find another explanation of this minhag in the Rishonim that I just mentioned before. Ikar zman mincha is mincha ketano. Mincha gedoyle is a b'diavad. Many people are not aware of this because in literacy yeshivas they usually daven mincha gedoyle, but mincha gedoyle is a b'diavad. The ikar zman mincha is mincha ketano. What is surprising, and many people are not aware, both the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch Weiss, there were many kehilas in which they daven twice mincha every day. They daven mincha gedoyle and again mincha gedoyle, and that was a very, very common minhag. And the machlokes between gedoyle Sfaradim and gedoyle Ashkenazim, which of the two is the choiva and which of the two is the nedava? Which of the two? But in many kehilas, they daven twice mincha every day, mincha gedoyle, and again mincha ketana. So, in other pshat, why do we daven musaf before mincha Yom Kippur is because mincha gedoyle is a b'diavad. And when Chazal say that mincha comes before musaf, that is mincha ketana. But we don't need to daven mincha gedoyle before musaf and sadtodia because mincha gedoyle is a b'diavad, and therefore mincha ketana would come first. An interesting question regarding Todia v'mekudash. How do we define Todia? At the beginning of the Shiur, I said it's relatively easy to define Todia, somewhat more complicated to define Mekudash. But now we have a question regarding Todia. Does it depend how many days or how many times? What would be defined Todia? Mat Ephraim Semetov Kuf Pei Aleph has a suffix, Rosh Chodesh Elul. Every Rosh Chodesh we say Baruch Nafshi, after davening, after the Yom. Every day Chodesh Elul, twice a day we say L'Dovad Hashem Orev Yishi. Which of these two Pirkei Tehillim comes first and which comes second? So the Mat Ephraim is of Ephraim Zalman Margolius, one of the greatest Gedolim in an age of giants. And what is unique about Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Margolius? He wasn't a Klei Kodesh. He wasn't a Rav or a Rosh Hashiva. He was a banker, and he was a very wealthy person, and he is considered one of the greatest Gedolim of his time, together with the Chassam Sofer and Rabbi Kiva Eger. The Chassam Sofer quotes his Sforim, and he wrote many Sforim. Shar Shuvas Beis Ephraim, Rosh Ephraim, and Yoredeya, Shar Ephraim, and Kriyas HaTorah. And one of his unique Sforim is Mata Ephraim and Chodesh Elul Tishrei. From Chodesh Elul till after the Yom Tovim is the Mata Ephraim. So the Mata Ephraim deals with the question, what do we say first? Baruch Nafshi or L'Dovad Hashem Orev Yishi? And he says, Baruch Nafshi is Todia, because we say it every Rosh Chodesh. But if we count how many times during the year we say Baruch Nafshi and how many times we say L'Dovad Hashem wins by far. So L'Dovad Hashem Orev Yishi from Rosh Chodesh Elul till Simchas Torah is a month and a half, twice a day. That would be 90 times. How many times do we say Boruch Nafshi on Rosh Chodesh? 18 times a year. Twice Rosh Chodesh when there are 2 days Rosh Chodesh, once when there's 1 day Rosh Chodesh. So this is 90 times, this is 18 times. Nevertheless, the Beis Ephraim says, Baruch Nafshi is more Todir, because it spans the entire year. The Hashem Yeshi is only confined to a month and a half. So the Mat Ephraim understands it doesn't matter how many times you do this mitzvah, but Todir means, is it more common throughout the year? And therefore he maintains that Baruch Nafshi that we say on every Rosh Chodesh has a din of Todia, in contrast to L'Doved Hashem Oire V'Yishi, which seems to be a gewaldige chiddush. Is there a din Kedima b'mitzvahs by a mitzvah which was chal first? Do we say any mitzvah that became a chiyuv earlier, we should be makayim earlier? Or maybe not. Do we find this principle? I mentioned before the Yerushalmi, the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, when you say Kiddush, which bracha comes first? According to Beis Hillel, Yain comes before Kedushas Hayom. Beis Shammai says Kedushas Hayom comes before Kiddush. And one of the reasons, one of the sources of Beis Shammai, Kvar Kiddush Hayom v'adayin Yain loibo. The chiyuv of Kiddush is chal b'tzeis ha'kirchavim. Yain is only when you sit down to the Suda. So Beis Shammai maintains, when a mitzvah is chal earlier, you should perform it. You should do that mitzvah earlier. Does Beis Hillel agree to this svara? Beis Hillel says Yayin comes before Kiddush. Because if not Yayin, you wouldn't say Kiddush, not this formula. So Yayin brings Kiddush ala kos. It is obvious that the svara of Beis Shammai is accepted by Beis Hillel well, but Beis Hillel says there's another svara that is more compelling, which overrides the svara of Beis Shammai. But Beis Hillel would agree that when a mitzvah is chal earlier, you should be makayim it earlier. And I come back to the Machne Ephraim, and this time in Siman Tov Reish Chof Hei. Sukkah or lulav? Which has precedence? And this question, once again, is we could only buy one of the two. We have limited resources. Which mitzvah is more chashuv? The Mat Ephraim says Sukkah comes before, because mitzvah Sukkah is belayla. Lulav is only in the morning. So Sukkah comes earlier, and that is why it has precedence. That's the Machne Ephraim. Yored Deyashin Nun Daled, we find the halacha, Shelo Neida. If there are 2 people to bury, the one that died earlier should be buried first, before the one that passed away, and he gave his neshama back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at a later hour. And the Pischei Tshuva on the spot brings from the Bris Avraham 2 different reasons for this halacha. It might be Mishum Kvoid HaMeis, or maybe it has nothing to do with Kvoid HaMeis. It's just a mitzvah upon the Chevra Kedisha. This person passed away earlier, so the chiyuv to bury him came before the chiyuv to bury another person. And we are to do mitzvahs in the sequence, in the order of when this mitzvah became a chiyuv upon us. So there's a famous story of Reb Chaim Brisker. And I always tell this story when I'm dealing with a general question, could we learn halachas from what is not written, or we could only learn halacha from what is written? I wrote a big kuntres about it. And maybe someday we'll say a special shiur, because it's a very general question, and there are many sources and also contradicting sources. So there's a story about Reb Chaim Brisker. A person came to complain. My father passed away very early in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and another person passed away in our town a few hours later. And for some reason, the Chevra Kedusha took care of the second before they took care of my father. and he wanted to call the Chevra Kedisha to a din Torah for Reb Chaim Brisker. Reb Chaim Brisker was dismayed and shocked. He took out a Rambam, he opened the Rambam Hilchos Sovel, and after a few minutes looking at the Rambam, Reb Chaim told the person, they did something very wrong, but you have no complaint. And the person didn't understand. If they were wrong, then I am right. If they were wrong, why don't I have a complaint? He goes home, he opens the Rambam, and he looks exactly where Reb Chaim looked, and he sees nothing. So he comes back to Reb Chaim Brisker and he says, Rabbeinu, mehechan dantoni, I looked in the Rambam exactly where you looked, and I saw nothing. What did you see which I did not see? And what is the strange psak? They were wrong, but you're not right, but you have no claim. So Reb Chaim says, the first is Sifin Shulchan Aruch. You bury the person that passed away earlier before you take care of another. Yesh lehistapik. Is it a din of Kedima b'mitzvahs, or is it a din of Koid HaMeis? I figured, says Reb Chaim, if it's din of Koid HaMeis, the Rambam should bring it with all the other halachas of Avelis, of Kvura, of Koid HaMeis. So I look at the Rambam. If the Rambam doesn't bring this halacha, this proves it has nothing to do with Koid HaMeis. It is rather a din kloli of Kedima b'mitzvahs. So it doesn't need to be here in the Rambam. So this is an example of Reb Chaim learning halacha not from what is written, but what is not written. So the fact that the Rambam doesn't write this halacha with all the other halachas of Kvod HaMeis and of Kvura proves it has nothing to do with Kvod HaMeis. And that's why I told you, said Reb Chaim, they did something bad. They didn't adhere to a Sif and Shulchan Aruch. But it has nothing to do with you. It's their problem. The mitzvah of Kvura is on them, and they should have adhered to the halacha in Kedima b'mitzvahs. But you only have one mace, so to you it makes no difference. But there's another pshat in the Achronim, brought in the Pesach Tshuva there, in Siman Shinun Dal Yoredeh, maybe it is a din of Kedima b'mitzvahs, like Reb Chaim's conclusion. So this would be another source. The later Achronim also deal with the question, there are two bris in the same day in Shul. Both are milah sheloi bismano. But one was born before the other. Which has precedence? Which child do we mal before the other? Is there b'chlal a din in Kedima? And many Achronim say the one that was first born is the first to be nimor. Maybe that would be a strange psak, because if one was born earlier, why wasn't he nimar earlier? Obviously, there was a reason we couldn't do the milah. So both, this is the first day they could do the milah. So why would I not have precedence? Why does it depend on how old the child is? Because the Chiyuv milah is only chal when he's out of the woods and he's no longer sick and there's no longer any reason to postpone the milah. What would be the din milah bismana and the milah sheloi bismana, which comes earlier? Some Achronim learned this din from the din lagabe kvuras hameis. So according to them, it's definitely not about kvod hameis, only about kedima b'mitzvahs. If it's about kedima b'mitzvahs, we could compare mitzvahs milah when there are two children to mitzvahs kura when there are two mesim. So this is an interesting discussion, whether there's another principle in Kedima b'mitzvahs besides Todir v'mekudash. The mitzvah that is first to come is the mitzvah that is first to leave. First to come is the first to be performed, and this principle also has various different sources. So the sugya we discussed today is the sugya of Todir v'mekudash and the sugya of Kedima b'mitzvahs. Baruch Hashem, Chacham Lev, Yikach Mitzvahs. Ratzu HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'zach Yisrael, Afichach Hirba Lehem Torah v'mitzvah Shalem Hashem, Chofetz Leman Sitka Yagul Torah v'Yadia. And we have so many mitzvahs that many times we are confronted with the question of Kedima b'mitzvahs, which mitzvah comes first and which mitzvah comes second. So this Thursday is already Shiv Osar B'Tammuz, and we are entering the 3 weeks of mourning. Daled Saimois, which are Tekonas Naviim, Tzoma Ravi, Tzoma Chamishi, Tzoma Shvi'i, Tzoma Asiri. 4 days, which are all associated with Churban Beis Hamikdash. Shavuos v'Tammuz huvka ha'ir. The Chayma fell, and the Romans stormed the city, and Tisha B'Av nisraf ha'heichal. So these are the 3 weeks in which we are noyeg certain minhagei avelis. Shavua shechal by Tisha B'Av, according to Ashkenazim, Tishas Hayomim, and some halachas in the entire 3 weeks. Kol ha'mesabel al Yerushalayim zoiche v'roye bevinyana is a promise of Chazal at the end of Masechet Tanis. The Chassam Sofer has a powerful word, and he says, Chazal don't say, Kol ha'mesabel al Yerushalayim yizke v'yir'eh bevinyana beloshen osid, but rather, zoche v'ro'eh bevinyana beloshen hoiver. And the Chassam Sofer says, the fact that after 2,000 years, we have not forgotten Yerushalayim. The fact that after 2,000 years, each and every year, we sit on the floor and we cry and we say Kinnis on Chorem Yerushalayim proves that Yerushalayim doesn't belong to the past. It's the present and not the past. We have not forgotten. No other nation in the world cries over tragedy that has struck thousands of years ago. So the Chassam Sofer says, in the fact that we are Mesabel and Yerushalayim, one could see that Yerushalayim is alive, Yerushalayim is with us, and Yerushalayim will be restored. And this is a dream that will be fulfilled. It was partially fulfilled in our time. So, Kol ha'mesabel Yerushalayim zoiche v'roye bevinyana. Are we yotzi yedei chayva only with avelis, or maybe we are required to do something more than avelus? The Yerushalmi says, and I quote this Yerushalmi many times, people aren't aware of the exact lashon of Chazal. So many times I ask people, I start the mama, could you finish it? Kol dor shelo nivna beis hamikdash b'yomav. Everybody quotes Ki'ilu Chorav b'yomav, except the people that remember my shmuz from a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. The exact lashon of the Yerushalmi in Yom Adafei is Kol dor shelo nivna beis hamikdash b'yomav malan olav ki'ilu hu hechrivo. And that is far harsher language than Ki'ilu Chorav b'yomav. When you say Ki'ilu Chorav b'yomav, it happened. It transpired. We bear no responsibility. It happened during our days. The Yerushalmi says, no, it didn't happen. Somebody bears responsibility. So many times I gave a mashal. Mother leaves the house for 10 minutes and she leaves the kids alone, and she knows her kids, her children. She warns them, I'm just going to the Makalat to buy a bottle of milk. And I want to find the house exactly as I am leaving it. 10 minutes later, she comes home. The flower pot on the table is broken into 1,000 pieces and the flowers are all over the floor. The big, beautiful window of the salon is shattered to bits. And she asks, who did it? And the kids say, no one. Who did it? It happened. And the mother says, it didn't just happen. Flower pots don't go jumping off tables, and windows don't decide we're going to break up alone. Someone did it, and I want to know who. So when we say Kol dor shelo nivna beis hamikdash b'yomav ki'ilu chorav b'yomav, it happened. Chazal say, it didn't happen, someone did it. And that someone is you. And that someone is you. And every generation that is not Zoche to the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, because if we would be fitting, we would have a Beis HaMikdash. And if we don't have one, it means that a Kodesh Baruch Hu decided that we still don't deserve one. And therefore, every generation needs to do its best to fix what previous generations broke and to rectify what was wrong. Weiss listen, Chazal say in Yerushalmi Daf Hey and Yuma and in Bavli Daf Tet, the three most terrible Avedas, Avodah Zorah, Shvichas Damim, and Gili Arayas. Weiss Sheni, they were diligent in their mitzvahs. They learned Bahasmada, Sinas Chinam, destroyed the Bayis Sheni. So if the Bayis was destroyed by Sinas Chinam, it will be restored by Ahavas Chinam. I don't know what Ahavas Chinam is. Ahava is never Chinam. But Ahavas Chinam is Ahava She'enet Liya B'davar. And we need a lot of it today. This is a terrible, terrible period of machlokes and dissent and so much friction, political friction and ashkafidik question between Ben Ish L'Re'eyo, even in families, between communities, one to another. And I always stay away from speaking in public about politics, and I never address current affairs. And I have a reason for that. But generally speaking, this is a very painful time in Klal Yisrael. So besides the terrible threats that we have, the external threats, and it is becoming quite obvious, a year ago, some of our leaders spoke about a new Middle East, Mizrach Tichon Chadash. It's becoming more obvious with every day. In Kol Chodesh Tachas Hashemesh. Nothing is new in our neighborhood. Mashahoyo, Hu Sheyeh ve'en Kol Chodesh Tachas Hashemesh. So, besides the external threats, our society is becoming unraveled, and this is so painful. Do I have any solutions? Well, I have a paraphrase over a quote of the Divrei Chaim. My great Rebbe, the Divrei Yatzev, used to quote the Divrei Chaim. The Divrei Chaim said, when I was young, I thought I'm going to fix the world. Many years passed, and I saw I'm not fixing the world. I decided to focus on my city, on Tzanz. Many more years transpired, and I saw it's not working. I focused on my family. And now I'm an old man, alavai, I should fix myself, said the Divrei Chaim. The way I see it, when I was young, I thought I'm going to become something. I thought I'm going to be great. I thought I'm going to be a tzaddik. Many years transpired, and I saw I'm not getting anywhere. I decided to start tormenting my family. More years transpired. I saw they're not listening to me. So now I'm an old man, I'm going to fix the world. It's easier, no? I'm an old man, I'm going to fix the world. So we're not going to fix the world. But everybody needs to feel responsibility in as much as his influence goes. And his Daled Amis, Lahabois Ava, Va'achva, V'sholom, V'reyes, and bring people together and try to do whatever we can do, each and every one of us in his limited influence, to be metaken sinas chinam. Hi shechriva es beisenu, v'sorvos hecholenu, v'adayin merakedes beinenu. To use the Lashon of Chazal. So Yerotzon, we should be zoichel laharbis ava v'achva v'sholom v'reis. We should be amongst those talmidei chacham shemar b'sholom b'yolam, and we should be zoichel b'kora b'yameinu to see ki atu Hashem be'esh yitzato u'be'esh ata osed levnoisa. We should be zoichel b'kora b'yameinu to see binyan beis hamikdash b'mheiro v'yomeinu amen.